When I think about estate planning, I sometimes think, oh, it's for the super wealthy. Who is estate planning really for? Like Garrett and I, we own a house, we are expecting a little one. Is estate planning right for us?
Clients will ask me this question. It really just comes down to your.
Hey everyone, Melissa Dargan here, and welcome to my YouTube channel on personal finance. Today, I'm very excited to have Lilith Mansuryan, an estate planning lawyer, to discuss estate planning. Because for me, now that Garrett and I are expecting a little one, it's time to start thinking about the future and what that means. And is estate planning even right for where we are as a family? Lilith, do you have any welcome words?
Yeah, hi, everyone. My name is Lilith Mansuryan. As Melissa mentioned, I am a trust and estates attorney, and I'm excited to talk all about estate planning. It's what I do all day, every day, and I'm glad to be able to be a resource for you and your subscribers, Melissa.
Thanks. And fun fact, Lilith and I go way back. We actually went to high school together. She's now married with a 6-month-old. So it's been exciting to reconnect and also just learn more about what this stage in our life means and why estate planning is important for you to consider. Before we dive in, if you enjoy this kind of content, go ahead and hit that like button and press subscribe to be updated whenever new personal finance videos are released. And Lilith, I know as a lawyer, are there any disclaimers you want to add?
For anything specifically related to your own situation, I always recommend talk to a tax professional, whether it be a CPA or accountant, to really get a little bit more of an understanding about how estate planning topics will affect your overall financial planning. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is from my background as a California licensed attorney.
All right, let's dive in and start asking these hard questions. So Lilith, just the quick basic 101. What is estate planning?
An estate plan, it's a set of documents that are meant to protect you on one level and your family on the next. Generally speaking, people shy away from estate planning because they think it's equated to death planning, but I really like to change the narrative and focus on the life planning aspect of it. Where you are in life, what you're planning for, what types of assets you've amassed, or perhaps you're going to be amassing. And so estate planning really is just life planning, getting all your documentation in order so that when the unbelievable happens, such as a pandemic or something happens where it throws your life for a loop and you need some legal documentation or support, you're not scrambling, you're not running around. That's the last thing you want to be doing. You have everything ready to go. It's just called proactive planning, in my opinion.
When I think about estate planning, I sometimes think, oh, it's for the super wealthy. Who is estate planning really for? Like Garrett and I, we own a house, we are expecting a little one. Is estate planning right for us?
Generally speaking, estate planning used to be for the mega rich. If you had an estate, right? It's quite an antiquated term, but rather when we talk about an estate, it just means you have assets in your name and now you have the right to dictate what happens to those assets. Definitely for a young family like yourself, like myself, it's very important for different reasons. In the event that something happens to you and your husband, who's going to not only raise your child, will there be enough financial support for the child to reach a legal age?
As estate planning is planning for the future, what are stories of some people who didn't plan ahead?
If you don't have an estate plan, as estate planning attorneys, we like to mention that your state of residence has a plan for you. Perhaps you are a couple who is living together, but in California, there is no such thing as common law marriage. So a lot of people will think, hey, we've been together for 15 years. That must mean under the eyes of the law that we have some type of ownership together towards this asset. Well, that's really not the case. If you are the sole owner of the property and you pass away, guess what? Your partner doesn't automatically inherit that property. So that was an issue for a lot of early on clients that I was helping because it became kind of a fad to not get married, but to buy assets together. That's one horrible horror story because you have a surviving partner who is dealing with grief, dealing with all of these things, and now potentially could be evicted out of their home by guess who? Perhaps the children of your partner that, there are not your children, but the children as the legal heirs to that property will now petition to receive the property outright and essentially leave you out.
Yikes. I mean, I've also seen families just sort of get destroyed after a loved one dies. When everybody's supposed to be coming together, like consoling each other. I've just seen people fight over the most minimal things, like not even a house that could be worth what, $500,000.
I've
It's
seen,
like,
yeah, I've seen
go
two
ahead.
sisters fight over a blanket.
A blanket.
Yes. Saying, Mom, Mom and I had this connection over this blanket. She always comforted me with this blanket. And the other sister said, well, no, when she was in the hospital, this is the blanket I used with her, and this is what I want from the estate. So the thing with that is really that grief causes people to react differently to every situation. Whoever might be cool and collected while you're here, when they lose you, they don't even know how they're going to react. And so that is why with estate planning, it's just simply getting your wishes on paper, showing your intent, identifying where certain assets are going to go. I'm not saying, every single thing in the home should be identified to who it's going to, but on some level, there should be proper planning done so that if there is a daughter that is very much connected to a particular piece of jewelry you have, earmark it for that daughter. If they don't want it at that time, that's fine. They can always decline. But at least, you've tried to act as a mediator even from the grave.
You mentioned this example of two siblings fighting over a blanket. So is there a minimum level of wealth that you need to have or assets in order to start estate planning?
Clients will ask me this question. It really just comes down to your overall life planning goals and really where your finances are. Because as a young family, even if you don't have a home, you most likely have life insurance, and make sure that you have someone in place to take care of your affairs when something happens to you.
So you mentioned with trust, then you're able to sort of like rule from the grave. Is that any different with a will? Like, what are the differences between the two? Do you need one or the other or both?
There is no difference in terms of what they do. They distribute your assets when that time comes. That is the nature of the documents. However, how they do that is what makes them different. The will, even if you have a will, it'll go through probate. Okay. It'll go through that court process in any state you're in, whereas a trust avoids probate altogether. That's why it is a lot more preferable for a lot of families moving forward now. I would say in the last 50, 60 years, it's become much more commonplace to have the trust option than a will. That being said, when you have the trust, you will still have a backup will. It's called a pour over will. That is in case you have any other assets that you forgot, or, the titling never changed into the trust title name. Then the will acts as a backup. Oops, I forgot document. It doesn't act on its own in that sense. It's just a bridge to your trust. Generally, if you have minor children, I would say opt for the trust because it allows, again, that sense of control or ability to be able to distribute out funds as needed if you're no longer here. But also, if you have a child with special needs, that's very important. You will need to get a special needs or supplemental needs trust done so as to not jeopardize their benefits. If you have beneficiaries that are older but not so great with money, how do you manage that? It's called a spendthrift trust, where you are able to give a monthly stipend until the end of that beneficiary's life so that they don't blow through it, but that there's some financial security. There are plenty of options. It just has to make sense for your family.
When do you actually need to establish this will or trust by? A lot of the times, I think the preconception is, oh, it's when you get older and you're like nearing death.
Theoretically, as soon as you get married, or if you have a child, you should have an estate plan in place.
Okay.
And that's because if something does happen to you, you have the legal documents already, your ducks in a row to take care of your child or perhaps your surviving spouse, and make sure things are, a seamless transfer of assets, or that your wishes are properly followed. That doesn't always happen. Or my own parents waited forever to get their estate planning done. It's just a matter of being ready. My recommendation is get it done early. You are supposed to develop with your documents. They're life documents. If you and I create our estate plan today, I can guarantee you we're going to change it 2 or 3 times before we finally pass. And that's a natural evolution of the documents themselves. Your documents should reflect where you are in life. As you buy more properties, as you open up a business, you're able to have your trust. Think of the trust as your basket. Hold all of these assets in place for you, and it just grows with you.
How would one do this? Do they have to find an estate lawyer? Can they just draft it up and write it on a napkin?
Yeah.
What is the process in order for somebody to estate plan? How do they even get started?
My recommendation will always be to retain professional services. Similar to you hire a CPA or an accountant to file your taxes, attorneys are well versed in knowing how to write certain things and making sure that it actually happens correctly. For instance, let's say if you've self-drafted and you did something wrong, you put one word can really make things go not great. And guess what? If they need some type of legal authority to decide what to do, they're ending up going back to court, which is what you did all of this to avoid in the first place. However, when you have an attorney who has drafted the documents, there is a level of protection that the beneficiary has. I have seen a good amount of things in my 10 years in this industry of just being able to pinpoint what you need and how to get it written correctly on paper. There's a website called avvo.com, which is kind of like a Yelp for attorneys, and you're able to write in what kind of subject matter you're looking for and then where you're living, and it opens up some attorneys in the area. There are cost-effective options out there, so don't feel like you have to spend $5,000 to get a good estate plan. There are plenty of attorneys that are committed to providing quality level documentation and service, but just really want to service the community that they're in, and thus their fees are a little bit on the lower side for that reason. Just bear in mind that they're legal documents, they're life documents. It's an investment in yourself, in your family, in your future. So sometimes it just makes more sense to save up a little bit and be able to get it done right the first time. Of course, there are services like LegalZoom, I believe We the People. I don't know if that's around where you are, but it is not necessarily a personalized experience nor a customized experience. Just the fees alone through LegalZoom or We the People or any of the self-drafting websites, you don't take into consideration that there are also notary fees and there are also recording fees for the property deeds or any business interest transfer that you're going to do. There's no level of conversation surrounding the documentation or the process. And so it kind of leaves you in the dark a little bit. Once you add up all those fees, it really does get up in price. And at that point, it's kind of like, well, why don't I just go with an estate planning attorney? Most of them work on a flat fee basis, very transparent about fees. It's transactional. So it's not necessarily on an hourly basis, depending on the type of estate. Generally speaking, you'll know what you have to pay after the first meeting with an attorney. I really am passionate about the fact that we need to have documentation in place. I tell my clients these documents don't matter until they matter. You just get it done, it gives you peace of mind. And when something happens, you will be more than thrilled that you have all that stuff ready to go already and you don't have to think about it or, try and get a notary to come to the house or the hospital to, notarize documentation or get an attorney who's going to charge you a crazy amount because you're going to want to expedite the process.
And if you're interested after you watch this video to learn more about estate planning or possibly hire an estate lawyer, I'm going to leave Lilith's information and contact in the description below so that you can feel free to reach out to her. And for those of you wondering what probate is, here are the details.
There is a process in the United States called probate. And probate is a court supervised distribution process of all of your assets, all of your wishes to actually be carried through. That's why so many Californians, so many Arizonians, even Texans are opting for living trusts as their main vessel for these types of assets because it avoids probate and thus avoids court. It avoids probate fees, which are very expensive. It can go into the tens of thousands just for your estate to go through this process. It's very expensive.
Wow.
But that is the main difference between a general will and a trust. One goes through probate, the other does not if done correctly. I will say, for example, in New York, probate is a very much more simplified process or just a well-oiled machine for some reason than it is in California, Arizona, Nevada, etc. And their probate processes can take 2 weeks and it's not that expensive. That's why people opt for a will perhaps in New York versus a trust.